Good morning. Today we are going to talk about the hidden action problem and its resolution as part of the principal agent approach. We are going to discuss today as a efficient wage as a resolution point to deal with such issue, especially hidden action and one of the mechanism to solve the principal agent issue. Now, shareholders want all employees from our earlier example. It is quite clear that shareholders want all employees to devote their effort to maximize firm's profit. Now, employee wants to maximize their net benefit. If the reward takes the form of fixed wage, the optimal course of action is to devote as little effort as possible in that sense. Now, we know that one can use market mechanism to reduce the moral hazard issue in an organization, and efficiency wage theory is a wage level at which the unit output labor cost is minimized in that sense. And now unemployment becomes unavoidable when the ongoing wage is higher than the market clearing one in that sense, which is crucial to this understanding. Now, suppose if you have a graphical representation of that, then you can look into the demand for labor without shirking the market wage can be actually fixed at some point. Let's draw it in a graph. In that graph, first what you have to have a quantitative labor on one side and wage on the other side, and you can fix that there is an optimal wage which is actually without shirking the market wage, which is W star, and full employment exists at L star in that sense. So now if you have a demand for labor which is drawn, and you have a supply of labor which is actually given in the over a period, then W star is going to be given, and of course you have a known shirking constraint which can also uh, possibly been introduced, that is the non-shirking constraint give the wage necessary to keep workers from shirking. So that is a higher wage. In fact, it is literally have a higher wage than the so-called market wage at the equilibrium wage. That means if you have these two wage coming together, then you have to have actually a wage rate which is supposed to be the market wage rate, which is much lesser, whereas this new non-shirking constraint wage, which would be actually giving a WE which is greater. At the equilibrium WE, the firm hires a lower quantity of workers, creating an unemployment of an L star. This is actually one of the mechanism in which we can say that there is an involuntary, not sorry, there is an involuntary unemployment exists in the economy. See, Milton Friedman, in some critical understanding of the earlier period, had made a point that at least 3-4% of unemployment is inevitable in the capitalist production structure. In that sense, this is what we can actually show with the help of this graph. That is, this is what is actually I was trying to say. That is, in the blue line you have a demand for labor, and the brown line, which is actually called the new non-shirking constraint wage, which is higher than what is actually expected earlier. Now, the earlier dashed SL curve is nothing but the fixed labor, which is the full employment labor. Now, if you want to actually fully employed, then the wage will coming down up to a level where your W star is equal to that L star. That is actually the kind of complete exhaustion of the labor market, especially labor from the labor market. Now, if you have a difference between LE and L star, there exists a very considerable amount of unemployment in that sense, because it is inevitable to have a higher W, that is wage, in order to reduce the shirking aspect of this particular thing. So this is what is actually the kind, and then we'll look into the other aspect like the holder problems. Now, what is a holder problem? It is an action to exploit another party's dependency. That is what is called a holder problem. That is, if I am depending on you and you are basically exploiting my dependence in that sense. So this is a kind of a problem which is normally you can see, and this is widely practiced when you have an asymmetry of information. And holdup occurs when transaction requires specific investment by one side or both sides in that sense. So relation between Nike and its subcontractor can be a classical case of this solve the problems. That is, asset specificity causes opportunistic behavior from the part of the seller or buyer in that sense, and the holder problem induces economic inefficiency, just like the efficient wage theory, whereas actually it is an inefficient wage according to the original understanding of the labor market clearing price, or the labor market clearing wage of the original kind. So it is in fact being treated as an inefficiency. The same the case with the holder problem also. Holder problem is also going to create a kind of market inefficiency in that sense. So contract solution is another mechanism in which you can resolve this issue. That is, contract can be used to detail the task and responsibility of all parties under different contingencies. That is, a well-written contract can help to clarify ambiguities and reduce possible dispute. A contract should be verifiable and enforceable in that particular context. So there is another kind of an issue which is called the ownership solution. That is, a contract may not be specific enough to include all contingencies, because we know that a complete contract is actually quite unrealistic. Now, once you say that a complete contract exists, then there is no longer an information asymmetry, as in the very beginning I was making. That is in the initial three lectures before. From the beginning of the fourth module, we were discussing this thing. So if a contract is incomplete, ownership matters, because the owner has the right to make decisions that are not explicitly spelled out in the contract. And that's so. However, the ownership means the right to claim the residual benefit. We have already seen how the managers are being the claimant of the residue. So now in this particular case, ownership means the right to claim the residual benefit. Now, in the the management principal agent problem, the manager has all possibility of basically exploiting this possibility. Normally, we used to say that this is, goes to the owner to basically claim the residue which is left over in the process of paying off of all the thing, and the remaining thing is belongs to the owner of the firm. So this is what is actually one of the, this is a very interesting proposition, and one of the aspect where Hart sorry Oliver Hart had worked, and Oliver Hart and Bangstrom even received a Nobel Prize for a contract theory, or property and contract theory, which is explicitly talk about this aspect of residual claim. And that means they are trying to make a firm as the owner of the residue in that sense. So ownership arrangement also determines the organization from the business in that sense. So ownership should go to the party whose effort has maximal impact on firm's performance. Some example is that employee share ownership plan, that is ESOP, employee share ownership plan, and stock option for senior management, joint ownership in joint ventures, etc., are normally treated as possible examples to come up with this. Overcome the problem of hold up in that sense. Now, but there are also issues because in the current world, the joint stock ventures, the corporations, which is normally joint venture in many contexts, corporations and all. So the Chinese party needs capital, technology, and know-how. Foreign party needs market access and networking. After forming a joint venture, both sides have incentive to take advantage of the party's commitment. And joint ownership may mitigate the hold-up problem in joint ventures, because this is a very important point. Because in 1970s and 80s, what happened with the American context, there is a lot of I'm not sure about actually the actual the fact of the thing, but there are stories and rumors about certain aspects of the Japanese growth. Of course, the Japanese industrial, or what you call the industrial technological advancement, because the know-how from the rest of the world being brought in Japan, and they deassemble the technology, and they used to produce it at very cheaper and a much better kind of a product in 1980s 90s. And also Japanese technology and the products got superiority over a period. But there is no such joint venture being proposed or being there in the very beginning, or in the early 70s or 80s, between Japan and other. But though they have actually some sort of information, but that has actually made them superior in technological aspects. And I haven't actually researched much on it, but still I feel that this makes some sense. And when you come to the modern times, especially the recent period and all, like in the post 1990s or 2000, you can see exactly the replication of the same in the Chinese production of it, and their competence towards industrialization and all. Now China become one of the not one of the, actually the capital of the industrial products of all across the world in that sense. Now precisely this, they also a sort of a mimicking of effect. But how Americans got actually, some sort of restrictions, or the so-called capitalist world got a restriction on this thing, is by their joint venture in that sense. Because now the American iPhone is being produced in China, or some firms in, or some production units in Shanghai or somewhere in Jinjiao, or there are many places, largely Shanghai and other parts of the Chinese production space, where the most of the American output produce, or technology driven things are now being produced in China, because of the cost advantage. And now what happens is, now China, that is why in the very, in an earlier lecture I said the Huawei, or no, the Chinese MI, or I mean all other different brands, especially Huawei and other, they have a far superior product, sometimes able to bring out in the market with a much cheaper price, because their production cost in that sense is actually much lesser. Therefore they could have afford a much better quality commodity at a cheaper price, and they can actually capture the market. For example, look at this watch. This is a Huawei watch in that sense, but this watch is much cheaper than an Apple a gadget in that sense. But it is far superior in many contexts, with that or the other thing. So I mean, of course, cost wise also it's not that cheaper, but still the Apple technology is much dearer than when you compare to it. So almost all the things which done by the Huawei is actually most of the third world consumers are happy with it in that sense. MI or Huawei or whatever produce output which they are bringing in the market in that. So this is also made possible because the hold up problem being sorted out by the joint venture or contracting by different firms. And also China as cheapest labor force being utilized by the American companies, or the German, or the Western world, or capitalist advanced capitalist countries in that sense. I mean, they both actually get benefit. Otherwise, what happened is that simply just like what happened in China, they will only completely dominate, or get all kinds of benefit in that. Now, it's in that sense a joint kind of reducing of the cost for, as far as American or the advanced capitalist countries are concerned. So, but at the same time, the Chinese economy, or they are advancing much better in that sense. So now let's move towards the other problems regarding this thing, such as the rent-seeking behavior. So elected politicians perform the role of agent, choose policy favored by principal voters, and a perfect agent would choose policy that fully informed median voters would choose. So a politician so selfless is the question normally everybody asks. Now, this is a very important question in everyday our discourse on uh, why we have to go for an X policy over a Y policy. Now, in Kerala, if you are now at the moment, the most heated discussion is on K rail, and earlier it was on Gale thing. And I mean, there are so many discussions happening in Kerala. regarding this kind. So whether you will go for whether the ruling party is actually so selfish, so selfless, or the ruling party is selfish, etc., are the kind of question, or they are going to damage the environment in that sense in a big way, in at the cost of, or in the name of development, or at the same time, on the contrary, this is also an inevitable thing, because if you simply calculate all the big numbers of introducing a new project and all, this is actually makes technically no sense for me. But other than, because most of the uh, roads, canal, everything is built based on all this kind of a discussion, like the cement, the metal, the kind of all kinds of other things, like um, rocks, etc. So the issue is not that, actually. If you compute that, you are using this much of things, the roads in India, Kerala is having a highest density for road as well as vehicle, etc. And still, those things, if you compute in that sense, then the state is, where does the state got all that? And then the entire discussion is going to be different in that sense. So I'm not actually telling that X policy or Y policy is a good one or not. But the issue is that we should be more realistic, more cost benefit kind of calculation is required. And simply just blaming in the name of a rent seeking or other thing is not actually the case. But now our point is actually to discuss about this aspect in an economic perspective, the rent seeking behavior of an individual. Now there comes the question, very relevant, that is whether the politicians are actually selfless or not. So the politicians might engage in rent-seeking activities that seeks to enhance their own welfare in that sense. Now, for a ruling party is concerned, so they want to actually, increase their own, face value, or whatever you can call their own welfare in that sense. So this would create an implicit tax wedge between the value of public good received by the voters and taxpayers. This is what is actually the argument placing against this ruling party by the opposition, especially those who are against this any kind of a policy. They're typically speaking against this government, because they say that there is an implicit tax wedge between the value of public good received by voters and tax paid in that sense. So extraction of political rent R. So let's make a calculation in that. So political rent R would require that the government budget constraints be written as G is equal to TNYA minus R. That is, the voters would take such rent-seeking activities into account when deciding on public policy. This is a very important context, because in the last election case, if we take for instance, that is in the last in Kerala, you have a practice of having a swing in front, a swing in the front. That is, this year if X rules, then the next year Y rules. But what happened is that the people do consider their face value in that sense. So this is a and the ruling party always maximizes profit or welfare. That would be the kind of, the same is actually the case with the opposition case also. The opposition also trying to improve their face value in that sense. But people do take consider, or do take the actions of the ruling as well as the opposition party, and that is why every year you have a swing in that sense. But after a long period, like for decades of the ruling in the Kerala, first time this happened, that there is no swing taken place in the in Kerala context in that. So it is very interesting to see why people have actually taken that sort of a move. So if the ruling party is rent seeking, that is like welfare, then people would have actually voted them out in that sense. But this is what is actually the idea which everybody, right from Riken to many political scientists, as well as theoreticians who talked about Riker was basically made all kinds of this proposition on the swing and the otter's behavior in that sense. Now, if you look into that particular point, the question remains relevant. That is, would like reduce G and T. than whether political rents can persist in an environment of open electoral competition is questionable. That is, candidate A announced a policy GTA, and candidate B can always choose a policy GTB that is more attractive to the median voters. And now, if the recently concluded election says that maybe the ruling class again, the ruling party, in fact, again voted back to power, and that means their policy being accepted by the people. And only with barriers to entry or imperfect information can positively run persisting in that sense. So that is why the other party, the third front, cannot even make a move in that sense. So private citizen may also seek rent for themselves by asking politicians to grant their favors in that. So maybe the opposition argument against the government is previous the incumbent the government was at that time is actually they are giving sort of all kinds of paltry uh, you know uh, kits for people like food kit, coupon, etc. And in that sense, during the time of COVID pandemic, but people were very positively responded towards that kind of an activity, welfareistic activity. However, it is minimal and all, but still, the people had a positive, sentiments towards that. Now, when you come to this, was actually made them to vote at the government in. But now, if you look into the aspect of K rail and all, which is also a looming discussion after the election. So now people were discussing. Now the opposition tried to build a kind of a momentum against the ruling party or the current government, saying that they are basically making inflicting a cost upon the people of Kerala. Now there is also a counter argument from the part of the government saying that we are not actually building all kinds of this development infrastructure development for the current year or for us, but for the future generation. So in that sense, they are trying to have a discussion, very healthy discussion for me, and that is in a democratic system. This sort of a very healthy discussion is necessary to reduce a kind of rent seeking. And this is very important because once this discussion was loomed and a lot of opposition pressure from the opposition party, then the ruling party was forced to bring out their plan and their rehabilitation plan, etc. immediately. Normally, it used to take a long period, but because of the democratic discourse, they are able to reduce the sort of you know this gap of bringing the rehabilitation plan. And also they do have now a blueprint. In that sense, it is in my view, this policy of building a K rail for or against is even if you keep that thing aside, but now the discussion is going in a right direction, and through that you can actually bring down the rent seeking behavior of the political party or the rent seeking behavior of whoever is in power in that sense. So this is a very classy way of understanding. Thus, the economic agent engage in a rent seeking activity when they use the political process to generate economic rents that would not ordinarily occur in the market transaction. And this is going to basically determine that whether the government policy is right or not in the future, where people have, I guess, still the chance of voting in or voting out these people. So in that sense, in a democratic setup, this kind of a discussion, rent seeking, understanding, this these are very, very important. And definitely in a microeconomic sense, we can actually analyze and model all the activities in that sense. So now once you have this thing, then we can resolve many of the inefficiencies in the market. Kind of this democratic discussion in that sense basically brings down the sort of inefficiencies which probably may cause to the private citizens or even to the society as such in that sense. So this is a very interesting way of looking at the problem. Now, the next issue and the last which I would like to discuss today is the rent dissipation. That is, if a number of actors compete in the same rent-seeking activity, it is possibly that all available rent will be dissipated into rent seekers' cost. And suppose a monopoly might earn profit of Pi M, and the franchise for monopoly can be obtained from the government for a bribe of B of B, which is less than the pi M in that sense. So the risk neutral entrepreneur will offer bribes as long as the expected gain exceeds the cost of the bribe in that sense. So if each rent seeker has the same chance of winning the franchise, the number of bribe, that is N, will expand to the point at which B is equal to pi M by N in that sense. So this is what is actually happens when there is a competition among different political parties which is competing for their electoral win, or they are part of the electoral system in that sense. So we had seen that the opposition, the party one, that is the coalition 1 and 2 would fail. Coalition 2 and 3 was failed, and the ruling coalition was actually triumphed in the Kerala context of, in a simple sense, you can say. So everybody had their own plan, where, they used to say that, for example, the money which they has offered, like say 2,500 rupees, the other said that, we will be giving a 6,000 as a kind of a support, social security support in that. So, but people had said that the realistic, which they were enjoying, is actually good enough than something which is promised for them in that. So maybe, I don't know, because these are the kind of evaluation from the side of people. They therefore, because of the competition, then the other coalition also came up with the similar sort of what you call the policies, and in that, a reliable coalition wins in that sense. So this is what is called the rent dissipation means. So in real world, all kinds of this information asymmetry based issues is in place, and therefore the value of information, understanding of this, and resolution points, etc., make its own relevance. So with this, let me conclude the lecture. Thank you so much for watching and listening.